Did you want to get on then to just describing Bitcoin and possibly to start by describing Bitcoin and also what is blockchain, which is the underlying technology that Bitcoin runs on?
Yeah, sure. So let me just skip ahead 2 slides to what is Bitcoin and blockchain, and then if you have, we can talk more about some of the blockchain challenges. So Bitcoin is money for the internet age. This is what we like to say in terms of the high level. It's people call it digital gold. I say it's like it is to money. Bitcoin is to money what email was to the postal service. So for people who remember the late '90s and remember, sending mail and sending faxes, and then we got email, and it didn't take very long before it was suddenly a whole lot easier to use email than it was to use other technologies. And Bitcoin really is that money. So it doesn't require any central government or any central authority to give you the permission to use it. This is really built for the internet age. So Bitcoin provides a bunch of benefits to the people using it. The first is freedom from traditional financial systems. So again, this is why people who don't have good banking, don't have good currency are using it. It's globally accessible because it's on the internet. It's got very low fees for use. And as maybe we'll talk about a bit later, it's got a fixed supply of 21 million Bitcoin. So 21 million doesn't sound like much. It's the key to being Bitcoin being a hard asset. So the way that the Bitcoin protocol started was it started as a piece of software produced by a synonymous person called Satoshi Nakamoto. He posted it on some crypto user boards and said, I think I found a way to have a digital money where you can't just copy the money and send a copy of it to avoid double spending the money. And there'll only ever be 21 million, but it's infinitely divisible. So I always think, it takes a while for this to really settle in if this is the first time you're hearing about it. But 21 million doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that infinite divisibility means that as the price goes up, there's more dollar amounts of Bitcoin available, even if there's less actual Bitcoin available because people have bought some and they're holding it. And you'll never get more than 21 million, which makes it a hard asset. But no other asset in the world operates this way. There is presumably some kind of fixed supply of gold in the ground and out of the ground in the world, but you can't divide it into smaller and smaller pieces the more people who want it. But when you have a digital asset, you can just divide it into smaller and smaller pieces. So you have the benefits of a fixed supply, but the ability for it to become more valuable as more people use it is very important when you think about the network effect of people adopting something. Why are Facebook and Twitter are some of the most valuable companies in the world? Because the value is driven by their network. The more people on their network, the more their network is of value to others who are using it. And the same is true for Bitcoin. It's more valuable to me having Bitcoin. When you, Peter, have Bitcoin, you and I can exchange Bitcoin with each other. The next store that shows up and says they'll accept Bitcoin increases the value of our Bitcoin. The next investor who buys some because they want to hold it for 10 years takes supply off the market, but doesn't stop the investor after that from buying some. They just have to buy some at a higher price. And these dynamics are driving value into Bitcoin. So it's decentralized, it's based on internet technology, and it's highly secure. And the innovation in Bitcoin was something called a blockchain. And so this really goes to the core technology. And we, I don't think we should go too far down this rabbit hole because we could spend all day talking about the technology.
Right. It's a whole other webinar.
It probably is, for sure. And I'd be happy to do that. But needless to say, all Bitcoin actually is a network of computers that agree on a ledger that says which addresses own which Bitcoin and how much. And that network and that ledger takes the form of something called a chain of blocks or a blockchain, where if I send you a Bitcoin, Peter, it goes into the next block in the chain. It's secured cryptographically by the miner who secures that block. And you can't undo that transaction. You can't go back and undo it. And as a result, anybody can look back in the blockchain and tell exactly how much Bitcoin anybody had at any given point in time and who has all of that Bitcoin today. So it stops the ability for double spending, and it allows there to be a verified chain that can never be manipulated. No government can go in and say, well, we're going to go into the blockchain and reverse that transaction where Elliot sent Peter Bitcoin. That's not how it works. It's not possible to work that way because of cryptography.
Yeah, and
This is
also it's copied. Like that's copied across that transaction is copied across millions of computers all over the world, and they all have that copy. So even if somebody tries to hack one of the computers, um, is that is going to not match what's shown on millions of other computers, and it'll basically be rendered false at the end of the day,
absolutely.
which is what gives Bitcoin its security.
It really does, and I mean, it's an elegant solution to this problem. And when you actually start to look at the blockchain, I mean, again, not to bash on money and banking too much,
Mhm.
but let's face it, you start to think about, well, how do I know how many dollars I have? Well, my bank tells me. They don't
Right,
actually have my money, as we all know. They only have a fraction of the money of all their depositors. And
right.
how do they have money? Well, the central bank tells them how much money they have in their various accounts. So you have all these trusted entities that you don't really know. I mean, do I trust the people at the bank to be honest? Do I trust the central bank to not print any more money? I'm not controlling that database. If they delete the entry, what am I supposed to do about it? So Bitcoin's
Yeah,
very different than that. We can all verify it ourselves. We can all see it on the internet ourselves. Anybody can run a node and check the chain.
yeah.
And there's
Nobody
so many
controls
software.
it. Yeah, nobody controls it.
Exactly.
Yeah, what you're describing for is the fractional reserve banking system that we operate in, and Bitcoin is almost the anti that because it is decentralized.
It is, and it's not fractional. You
Mhm.
can't I can't say, well, here on this, you really have 2 Bitcoin, but
Right,
I'm only showing you a quarter of it now. It just doesn't
right,
work that way. And I think over time, Bitcoin has really shown itself to be resilient against efforts to try to control it by various different governments around the world, and it continues to go strong. And every 10 minutes, there's a new block because that's how the software works.
right.
And the more people who adopt it, the stronger it gets. And I think we're well past that inflection point now in terms of the strength of this project.
Regarding that, if we can spend not too much time, but just a little bit of time on maybe some of the problems that this type of consensus solves, because that's what we're talking about. Is we're talking about consensus without trust, or a trustless environment. And one of the examples that's often kind of tossed around the internet is how Bitcoin solves something called the Byzantine generals problem. Which when I first read it, I'm trying to think how maybe it was 10 years ago when I first read about this. Kind of blew my mind. I didn't really think in these terms, but then after seeing the issues surrounding trust, and how those problems of trust need to be solved, and how Bitcoin solves it, it was definitely a new day at that point in time. So,
Well, it's funny when you read the history of Bitcoin from a technical perspective, you realize that there are so many of these theoretical problems in things like cryptography or math that are never relevant to your day to day until one of them becomes, the basis for a new technology, like in this case. And so this is a very long discussed problem among cryptographers. And in a nutshell, it describes a situation where you want to gain consensus among a group of people who need to cooperate, but you can't trust everybody. And the example is given of a whole bunch of generals are going to invade Byzantium, which is
right,
ancient city. They need to coordinate so they all attack at the same time. If they all attack at the same time, they'll be successful. If any of them don't, they won't. And the
right,
problem is they can't trust each other they can only communicate with messages, and they can't trust the messengers to be loyal, and there not to be any traitors who are trying to poison the plan. So how do
right,
you deal with consensus when there's some number of malicious participants who want to ruin your scheme? And
right.
so
Yeah,
Satoshi Nakamoto's real innovation, I mean, he was mostly using off-the-shelf building blocks of cryptography to put together Bitcoin, but his innovation was how he combined them. And so he realized that the solution was create a chain of transactions where each new transaction requires something called proof of work, where a significant amount of computational energy has to be spent by a whole bunch of people mining in the network in order to come up with the answer to that computational problem to get the new block on the chain.
yes,
Such that if somebody wanted to go back and redo that block and change that block, especially if you're going back multiple blocks, the amount of energy required to spend to alter the chain would be unfathomable because
Yeah.
it's too much and nobody has that many chips and that much energy. That would then make it a system where you're sure that the work was done to create the net set of transactions in the ledger. The way that the software works, it's very difficult to solve that problem, but trivial to make sure that it's solved, which is why you can have people mining Bitcoin, they're solving the problem, and then nodes, like I run a very small node at home that just is part of the validators, and they just check to see that the problem was correct. And those two things together mean that the longest chain of mined blocks is always the official chain, and it's basically impossible to go back in time and edit the chain. And the beauty of this, because it's on the internet, it's decentralized. So you have people mining all over the world. And the blockchain, along with the fees that people pay for their transactions, that's what the miner receives for doing the work of mining the block. So there's an incentive to be the first to figure out that puzzle, to put your energy and put your computational power into the network to secure it. This is a technical way of solving this problem of trust. And it sounds complicated and ridiculous. And why do we need that? And the question is, okay, well, you can either have that, or you could just have the government say, trust us, we'll tell you how much currency is in the society. And the banks say, trust us, we'll tell you how much currency is in your account. Yeah. And so we live in a trustless model today. You can choose that. But if you don't have that trust, if you live in a country where the currency is being destroyed by government decisions, there's now a trustless way to have digital scarcity in money on the internet, and that's Bitcoin's key innovation. And this was the breakthrough in 2009 that Satoshi Nakamoto came up with. That prior to that time hadn't happened. And here we are today. Bitcoin has been mining blocks every single day since it first started, without any interruption, without anybody going back and altering the chain. It clearly works, and it has been resistant to all kinds of different hostility from governments who have been trying to, say it's not real or whatever. And now those governments are accepting it, regulating how you can use it within investment accounts, and realizing that it's real and it's here to stay.
Yeah. So just to kind of just hit the nail here, this is very, very important to understand, because at the end of the day, right now we live in a trusted environment where we have to trust somebody at the end of the day with our money. We have to trust the government. We have to trust the central bank. We have to trust the bank that you deal with. And this is a little bit actually difficult. I think you mentioned this a few minutes ago. It's a little bit harder for Canadians to understand because we lived in such a stable society with a stable banking system for decades and decades and decades that, to us, most of us would be like, yeah, what's the problem? Everything's fine, isn't it? But again, going back to my example, with the, I think this is a billion dinar bill, in former Yugoslavia, banks failed. The central bank failed. The currency failed. And that trust that people there gave to their central bank and their governments and their local banks ultimately failed. If anything, they understand this better in some respects because they know what can happen when you trust and it doesn't work out. This solves that in the sense that it's a trustless environment, meaning that we have complete trust in the system because we don't have to trust anybody. The record, the ledger, is copied on so many computers, and it's so impossible to change it that trust is essentially assured, really, by not having to trust anybody. So I gotta admit, I never thought in these terms before I read the original white paper, but then after I did, it certainly started to answer a lot of questions of what happened in the past, including where I'm from in Yugoslavia. So
yeah, I think that nailed it, and I think that's really why people are gravitating towards Bitcoin more and more due to the recent bout of inflation that has been ripping around the world. People are starting to realize, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Maybe I need something else in addition to my money to help me out with that.
Actually, Elliot, did you want to talk about that now? Because that you touched on it a bit before, because Bitcoin is limited to 21 million Bitcoin, and you just cannot copy it, and you cannot create more beyond that amount. In difference to money that we understand it, where it's constantly being created every single day, which is dilutive. to the purchasing power of that money, which we call inflation, but really it's a dilution of purchasing power because too much of it is being created.